The following program is being brought to you on the Voice America Health and Wellness Channel. For more information about our network and to check our additional show hosts and topics of interest, please visit voiceamericahealth.com. The Voice America Talk Radio Network is the worldwide leader in live Internet talk radio. Visit voiceamerica.com. The views and ideas expressed on the following program are strictly those of the host or guests and do not necessarily reflect the views and ideas held by the Voice America Talk Radio Network, its staff, and management.
Loss in our lives takes on many different forms and can be more than just a physical loss. It goes beyond that to include emotional loss, business loss, and loss of personal health. This is Voices for Healing with Cathy Roberts. Today, Cathy and her guests will help you find out that you are not alone in dealing with loss and grief. There are so many different ways to deal with loss. What works for some may not work for others. Together, let's find the solution that you can use. Here's your host, Cathy Roberts.
Hello, listeners, and welcome to Voices for Healing Talk Radio. I'm your host, Cathy Roberts. Those of you that follow the show regularly may have noticed that there was a change in the planned show for May 19th. That show, Weathering the Storms, did not air due to a storm in my own life that interfered with my being able to produce the show. I had a minor medical event, which I am fully recovered from. And instead of hearing me talk about weathering the storms, you got to hear Dr. Eva Selhub again as she talked about the power of nature to heal. And I hope you enjoyed that show. I'm glad to be back now, live and on the air with you. And we are back on track with a summer schedule that's filled with wisdom and inspiration for you, our listeners. And I'm excited about today's show and the upcoming shows. In my work as a professional counselor and educator in the Washington, D.C. area, I work with people living with and growing in response to all kinds of losses, great and small. You can learn more about me and my work on my website, cathyroberts.net. And from there, we can connect on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and more. You can also subscribe to this radio show, Voices for Healing, on iTunes and get regular podcast downloads. Each week, the show features a guest who has expertise in some area of healing loss and restoring resiliency. My wish for everyone listening is that you connect with some of what you get to hear on the shows and be inspired to use challenges to grow and become your most real and true self. Today, my guest is MJ Ryan. Hello, MJ, and welcome to Voices for Healing.
Hello, I'm so happy to be with you today.
And I'm glad you're here. Let me tell our audience a little bit about you and what to expect in the upcoming hour, and then you and I will dive in. Dubbed an expert in human fulfillment, MJ has served as an executive coach and leadership development trainer to women executives, entrepreneurs, and emerging leaders around the world for the past 13 years. She offers leadership development to women in organizations, including Microsoft, Facebook, Hewlett-Packard, Chevron, Frito-Lay, and many, many more. One of the creators of the New York Times bestselling Random Acts of Kindness series and other books, including Adaptability, How to Survive Change You Didn't Ask For, MJ has appeared on The Today Show, CNN, and hundreds of radio programs. I'm really happy to have her on ours today. Named the San Francisco East Bay Woman of the Year by Diablo magazine, she gives keynote speeches and workshops throughout the world. We're incredibly fortunate to have MJ here with us today. In the hour ahead, we will delve into attitudes and techniques to help you accept what you didn't ask for. We'll look at how you can broaden your options as you adapt to changes and discuss how to take action to move through the situation you're in. Surviving change we didn't ask for is, I think, the number one thing that people come to my office about. Whether it's a family illness that rocks their boat, a relationship that they thought would last forever that doesn't, children who don't do what we want them to, or a death or divorce, people do the right thing by realizing that they need a team and support to help them, and there's lots of help available. MJ and I do that in our work lives, and we hope today you will learn some tools to help you survive changes you didn't ask for. In her book, How to Survive Changes You Didn't Ask For, MJ writes, Aikido masters say that to be successful in life, 3 kinds of mastery are required: master of self, which means understanding our feelings and thoughts and how to regulate and direct them, mastery with others, which means being able to create shared understanding and shared action, and mastery with change, which means having the capacity to adapt easily without losing our center, which include our values, talents, and sense of purpose. MJ, some people seem to be born adapters and engage change easily, but for many, that's not the case. Why does unexpected, unwanted change give so many of us a challenging, hard time?
Well, I think that there's a number of reasons. I think that whenever a change comes that we didn't choose, it brings up a whole host of feelings, and first of which is a loss of control, right? We thought we were in charge of our lives and it was going to happen the way we thought it was going to happen, whether that's work or relationships or whatever, and then suddenly it isn't. And so that sense of loss of control that I don't get to be in charge of it, that alone is hard. But I believe that whenever there's a change we didn't want, it sets off, even if it's a small one, process, a grieving process, because there has been a death. There's been a death of a dream or an idea of ourselves or the way that we imagined our relationship going to be. There is a loss, as you talk about, on your show, and that loss sets off a series of feelings, right? The grieving process of anger and denial and hopefully ultimately acceptance. But it's no small thing to go through that, right? Especially if it's something that's really painful.
Yeah, it seems that it's helpful for us if we begin to expect that changes will happen. And when they do, we can expect to feel loss, anger, loss of control, some sort of hurt or pain or anger along with it.
Yes.
Would you?
Absolutely. That's part of what I think is so amazing about the Buddhist first noble truth, which is that everything changes. It's his law of impermanence. And just really getting that, just saying this is life. Life is ever changing. That helps us understand that it's not personal. We're in the great flow of life, and these things do occur.
Yeah, I like that it's not personal, because oftentimes that's where people go very quickly. Why did this happen to me? Why? And they'll look at other people whose lives they think are perfect from their perspective and not really understand how this could be happening. Whereas things that happen large and small to people all the time, and we get to learn to deal with them.
That's right. And especially in the work world, where I work with a lot of folks, they're talking about how more and more there's going to be this uncertainty and volatility and rapid transformation of everything continuing on. It's not going to get stable anytime soon. So our ability to be able to relate to that uncertainty and to things as they change is, I think, a key tool that we need in the 21st century.
Yes, and I think we can, and I know you do, expand it to the work world and our personal lives as well, where so much change is happening so rapidly, so quickly, and it's a lot to process.
Absolutely. The other thing, though, is that you asked, why is it hard for some people and not so much for others? Some of us have this talent where we're excited by change and transformation. Now, it doesn't mean that if there's a personal loss, you're not going to feel bad. But for instance, when work changes or the environment changes, or you have to move or whatever, some people are energized by that. They're very innovative in their thinking, and they like a lot of transformation and change. And so those people, it's much, much easier. But for the rest of us who don't have that, we like it the way it is. Part of the reason is because our brains like habit. The brain, uses a lot of the body's energy, and one of its strategies is to habituate and to like things to stay the same, so it doesn't have to work so hard. And so, even if it's a change that's kind of a minor thing, you've got to drive it. I mean, so silly. I broke my foot, and we moved the trash can right from the bathroom next to the bedroom because I can't move around very well. Well, my husband keeps going to the bathroom to throw away the stuff, right?
Yes.
It's been 3 weeks. He's still going into the bathroom. That's the brain habituating. It doesn't want it to be different. And when we see it for little things, it's funny, but in the big things, it can be really hard.
We get really comfortable with what's familiar and
Yes.
think it will be that way on and on and on and on.
Yes.
And then when it's not, then there's that shake up and adjustment, which, like you say, some people get excited by that and challenged by it and just see opportunity and possibility very quickly. And others kind of get dragged into it. Like, oh, I have to do this. This isn't what I wanted, but
That's right.
somehow I'm in it.
That's right. But we all can learn to be more adaptable and resilient. That's what research tells us. So that's the good news.
And I love that as the message of your book and what you do in the book and how you lead us through the from acceptance to I'm having a mind blank right now, but as you lead us through the parts of that process, I think you really do a fine job in the book, How to Survive Change You Didn't Ask For, of helping us do that. So as you do this, what kind of things do you do to help people who come to you begin to look at and accept the change that's happening for them? Where do you start in that acceptance process?
Well, I think part of what we can do for ourselves is really ground ourselves in the facts. What is actually happening? What is actually changing? And part of why that's such a big deal is because our brains tend to make stories and assumptions and conclusions about what's going on. So I'll give you an example. When my former partner in business and in life dumped me when I was 39 years old, that was the fact. He told me he wasn't in love with me anymore and our relationship was over. Okay. So what did my brain do with that? I'll never fall in love again. I'll never get to travel anywhere again. I'm too old and ugly to attract anybody. I mean, my brain gave me all kinds of horror stories, right?
Yes.
That made the situation, the emotional situation, worse. Yes, it was terrible. Yes, it was out of the blue. It was a long term. 14 years we had been together. It was a big deal, no question. But I made it worse because I told myself these scary stories, which turned out not to be true because 6 months later, I met the guy that I've been married to for 22 years. So none of those stories turned out to be accurate.
Yes, and that's something that we're really great at doing, isn't it? Taking one thing that happens and making up stories around it based on our fears or our feelings
or
thoughts.
History. That's right. Yep.
Yes.
And the brain, so the thing about this is that it does this automatically. It's part of what they've discovered about how our thinking brain actually works is that it takes in information and it makes assumptions and conclusions so that we can carry on. Like, okay, if it's cloudy, I better bring an umbrella, like that. So that's a good thing. It helps us to plan. But it's also a bad thing because these assumptions and conclusions can get in our way when they're catastrophizing, basically, unnecessarily. So when you recognize that you're doing that, you go, okay, wait, you don't actually know what's going to happen out of this. Right now, all you know is this has happened and it doesn't feel good.
Yeah, sometimes I think if we're making up stories, maybe we could at least make up a story that helps us feel better about it.
That's actually a technique, right?
Yeah, rather than those stories that leave us feeling in our kind of old patterns of fear.
Absolutely. So what's a positive story? That's another way to work with yourself, which is what is a possible story that you can believe. You have to believe that using the same information, right? A story of hopefulness, a story of optimism, a story that leads you to a better place, right?
Yes.
That's right.
Yes. Yeah. So one of the things that I think you and I both think is important, I have a strong existential streak in me and like to find meaning and understanding and things that happen. And I'm wondering how you help people to do that, because I think when we can begin to create meaning for ourselves around whatever might be happening in our worlds, then it becomes something that we have more understanding and more of a grasp of and are more willing to engage and work with because we're trying to figure out, oh, there must be something in this for me.
Right.
What kind of things do you do that help people create meaning out of tragedy?
Well, first of all, I think that it's one of the 5 keys of resilience. So it's a really important thing to do. But it's at some point. I don't try to force people there Because I think that that's the hardest thing to do when something is really hard, is to say, what's the upside of this? So I'll give you an example. Well, my sister's house burned down, okay? Mm-hmm. And she had many, many, many other really hard things in her life. And suddenly, sort of things seemed like it were going better, and then her house completely was destroyed, lost everything. Except pets and people, thank goodness. Yes. And so she calls me. We live 3,000 miles apart, and I just wanted to be with her in her feelings. Of course she was upset. Of course it was terrible. It was not the day to say, and what's the meaning of this for you, my darling sister?
Right,
Because she would just have chopped my head off, right, if she could have.
Yes, absolutely.
Right? So I just kind of waited, right? And she, who has been through really hard things and knows some of the skills of resilience, about 6 weeks or 8 weeks later said to me, it's amazing. I've been talking about trying to declutter my life, and she said, it's so great. All this stuff is gone. I don't have to deal with it, right? So she found meaning herself. How I encourage people is when it feels like it's the right time, or sometimes I say, when you're ready to look at this, you might ask yourself the question, what's the upside on this? Or how have I grown or learned as a result of this? Or what's the deeper meaning for me? But I think it's something that really can't be forced. Because then it doesn't actually work because you don't believe it. But
Absolutely.
But I think there always is some kind of lesson. I don't think it means we did it on purpose to ourselves to have the lesson, but I think that when hard things happen, there is always some kind of growth or learning or gift. One of my clients, when I was lying in bed with shingles a couple years ago, said to me, some gifts come wrapped in sandpaper.
Oh, yes.
And I love that. So, and then sometimes I say, what's the gift in the sandpaper? But at the beginning, all you can feel is the sandpaper, right?
Yeah, that's right. And I think of the stages of loss that we often talk about, and how denial and anger and bargaining and some of those other things are what we go through before we can begin to look at those questions about, well, yeah, I can see something positive in this, or there's an opportunity in this too, and I'm going to find it.
Yeah.
You mentioned the keys. There were 5 keys of resilience. And I wonder if you could speak to another one or two of those that perhaps are more basic than finding meaning in.
Yeah. So the couple that you can do right even at the beginning is gratitude. So gratitude is one of the positive emotions that we can trigger at any point, and that helps us. And that means you look at what else in your life is still okay, is still good, that you can still enjoy. It's an and experience, not an or experience. It doesn't deny what's happened. It doesn't say, that bad thing is a good thing. It says, yes, that's true and it's awful and terrible, and in this moment, what can I appreciate? What can I enjoy? And so it widens your thinking. It makes you realize that what the good is still there. And when you do it, you actually give yourself a little hit of the feel-good hormone, so you've got a little more energy to deal with the challenges. But it's a very simple thing we can do even in the midst of really hard things.
Yeah, there's always something we can search around and feel grateful about. It may be as simple as we can think that we want to feel better and we're going to find a way to do it. Or it may be as simple as we can move our hand to our mouth to feed ourselves or brush our teeth. There are all sorts of things that are real basic.
Yes, and I learned that from my dad when he was dying. He was just days from death, and I said, do you still enjoy your life? I don't know why I asked the question. He said, I like to watch the ball game on TV. I like to read the comics in the newspaper. My life is good.
Yeah. And I love that question just arose spontaneously. It sounds like that's the kind of question that spirit within thinks to ask. MJ, I can't believe this, but we're already coming up on the time for our first break. And I want to share this with our listeners. It's from your book. According to resiliency research, change masters allow themselves to feel their difficult feelings, but they don't take them on as a permanent state. Psychiatrist Stephen Wallen points out on psychologytoday.com, it's possible to hurt and rebound at the same time. Mm-hmm. We human beings are complex enough psychologically to accommodate the two. We can both feel bad and move on. You were addressing that a bit ago in your both and comment.
Yes. Yes.
It requires that we practice both and thinking rather than either or thinking. We can say, yes, I made financial mistakes, and I am a responsible person. When you find yourself thinking either this or that, challenge yourself to think both and. It's time for us to take a break. We'll be right back with MJ Ryan.
Think you've seen everything there is to see in online television? Let us surprise you. Visit voiceamerica.tv today for sports, health, business, and more on demand 24/7.
Cathy Roberts is not only an exceptional radio host, she's an exceptional listener and counselor. Cathy appeals to motivated, high-functioning people to help them improve their health and vitality. Cathy can meet you where you are and help you identify what you want. Visit Cathy's website at www.cathyroberts.net or call her at 301-651-0019. Cathy works with both individuals and couples and specializes in grief and depression counseling. Get to know yourself by working with Cathy. Visit cathyroberts.net or call 301-651-0019. Cathy Roberts offers Circle of Voices teleclasses to help you focus your mind, engage your energy, and awaken your inner guide. Through this experiential and interactive series, you will know yourself more and learn to express yourself authentically in your personal life. Visit Cathy's website at cathyroberts.net to find out about this teleclass series, designed to open you to change and engage healing in the fabric of your life. Go to cathyroberts.net or call Cathy at 301-651-0019 for more information.
Now you don't have to stay linked to your desktop or laptop. Take Voice America on the go and listen anywhere. Get our mobile app for iPhone, BlackBerry, or Android at the Apple iTunes App Store, BlackBerry App World, or Android Market.
You are listening to Voices for Healing with your host, Cathy Roberts. If you have a question or comment for the program, please send an email to Cathy at cathyroberts.net. That's Cathy at cathyroberts.net. Now back to Voices for Healing.
Welcome back to Voices for Healing. I'm Cathy Roberts, and my guest today is MJ Ryan. We are talking about surviving change you didn't ask for. In the first part of the program, we covered ways that we can begin to accept change we didn't ask for and talked about some keys to resiliency that can help us bounce back when things that we didn't expect and didn't want happen to us. Emotions sometimes can get in our way of being able to recover from these things that happen for us. And two of the big ones, I think, that we can respond to automatically when some kind of change that we didn't expect happens to us are fear and shame. And MJ has some information for us that she has recently come across that can give us some pointers on how we might be able to use our fear and shame and work with them and keep them from working against us when we have change that we didn't ask for. MJ, what have you read recently about fear and shame and other anger, the other things that we call challenging emotions or difficult emotions?
Yeah, so one of the things, feeling them, acknowledging them is important, but sometimes we can really get stuck there. So there's research that says if we take action, that it's in response to them, then it helps us relate more effectively. And the actions for each are interesting. So when we feel anger, what's been found, aside from acknowledging it, is that the best action we can take is to help somebody else. So anger, if we say, okay, I'm angry about this and that, who can I help? Not the person necessarily you're angry with, but
right.
As an action to take to help somebody else. Fear, it's go do the thing we're afraid of.
Yeah.
Right? And shame is to tell somebody.
Yeah.
Because shame is the thing about we feel like this thing is so terrible and it's all our fault and we have to hide, right? So the opposite action is to tell somebody, this is what's true for me. This is what So these things are not necessarily easy to do. I think helping somebody is probably the easiest one. That's kind of like the random acts of kindness thing that I think is so good for people. But the other two, so just to kind of keep that in mind and then maybe ask yourself, because one of the things we haven't talked about is that when we're going through something that's challenging, it's not do we need support, but what kind of support do we need, right? We can't go through these things alone when they're so powerful. And so maybe you can reach out for help to go towards what you're afraid of, or to reach out to tell somebody how you really feel, and if it's in terms of shame. But they've been found to be very powerful counterbalances to those emotions.
Yes, and what I find with the fear and shame responses, and I agree with you that when angry, doing something to help somebody else is probably the easiest one. And the fear and shame ones, fear and shame are emotions we really want to run from or hide from or stick our head in the sand around.
Yeah.
And both of these responses of moving towards the fear, doing what we're afraid of, and sharing with someone what we are ashamed of. And I can really attest to the power of doing both of these things as someone who has lived with a lot of fear in her life and really loves that Eleanor Roosevelt quote, do one thing every day that scares you, or something to that effect. Yeah. It really is. And you really do build confidence and agency as you do things that you think you're afraid to do. If somebody told me 30 years ago I would be doing what I'm doing right now, I would have been shocked and told them they were probably crazy because
exactly.
I couldn't imagine doing this 30 years ago. And shame can really cause us to seize up and be immobilized. And I was just telling one of my clients last week that we all feel it. And the real antidote to it is to be able to share it with one person in a safe situation. So yeah. You talked about us needing a team.
Yeah.
And there's somewhere in your book where you talk about the 3 kinds of support that are available to us. And as we begin to move into the second part of our program, which is about expanding our options and opening up what we think is possible to us, available to us because of this change, and what really is out there, it's like a smorgasbord that we can really taste from. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about the tangible resources and the other kinds of support that we can build a team of people around us to help us with.
Yeah, I think it's first about really saying, what do I need for support, right? Do I need support for my feelings, which is what we've been focusing on so far? Do I need to help expanding my options around how can I deal with this change? So sort of practical support. Sometimes we need financial support. Sometimes we need, like practical support, like I broke my foot, so I need someone to drive me around kind of support, right?
Yes.
So it's really just, first of all, accepting that that's okay. I think that's the first step, right? Because somehow we think, we're tough Americans and we're supposed to be independent and do everything ourselves. And when we're going through things like this, we're more vulnerable, and that's okay. Well, acknowledging our vulnerability and asking for help is, I think, a really important a way to acknowledge that something hard is happening. Back to my breakup, my friend counseled me to, this is before email, this was a long time ago, I sent a letter to every single one of my friends, and I said, this has occurred, and here's how you could help me. Take me out to dinner, call me on the weekends. It's like I gave really specific ideas. It was the scariest thing I ever did. I literally wrote to everybody and asked for them for help. And people were so happy because then they knew how they could help me. But it was a big deal to me, right? Because I wanted to be the helper.
It was a real act of courage
to
do that. And also an act of clarity for yourself. I think about when I went through a major breakup 7 years ago, and I wasn't really clear on knowing what I wanted or needed, and relied on people around me to help me figure that out. And that was part of what I needed at the time.
Yeah, exactly. Well, someone helped me come up with that list, right?
Yes, yes. I don't know that I need somebody to come over to my house every day and be with me. But when somebody says that I think you need this, and I can say, oh, you're right, I do. Then,
right, exactly. So sometimes we need help in figuring out what kind of help we need.
That's exactly what I'm saying here. And any of that involves what we talked about before, cutting through our fear, cutting through our shame, and asking for what we need, and then being able to accept it from others.
And know that one of the things that's interesting on the resilience research is that when we cultivate this resiliency, when we go through hard things and learn and grow, we're actually more able to help other people. So it's just your turn now to be on the receiving end. Sometime soon you'll be on the other side, and you'll be able to be giving help based on what you've learned and grown. And so understanding that, you can just say, it's just right now, this is my time on this side of it.
It really helps. Someone told me that in the middle of it when I was feeling like, I was feeling needy. And, this person said to me, you know what, this is just right now. You'll be here long enough. You'll be around long enough. You're going to be able to help us out too. And
that's right.
That felt really good.
Yeah.
That felt really good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So when we begin to think about how do we expand our way of looking at things, something can happen and we can get very narrow-minded in how we're looking at it. And yet there are always options and possibilities that are outside of the blinders that we have put on ourselves. How do we begin to expand those options and begin to think about possibilities rather than just the negative story that we're telling ourselves?
Right. Well, I think this is one of the ways that people can really help us, other people can help us, because they can see things for ourselves that we can't see, right? I will never forget my friends came to visit on the day that I got the actual day of my dump. I called, and because I was in desperate pain, and friends flew in from L.A. and sat with me. And it was a husband and wife, and the guy, when he hugged me hello, he whispered in my ear, "This is somebody's lucky day."
Oh.
And that, his belief, right, that there was going to be love for me and that there would be somebody there. It's like that helped. I couldn't believe that, but he held it for me, right?
Yes.
So that's part of it, is being surrounded by people who help you see wider helps a lot to expand your options. The other is a technique that I love that I learned many years ago. It's supposedly from the Native Americans, and they would say that if you haven't considered 7 options, your thinking is incomplete. So I use this all the time with people whenever they're stuck on anything. It doesn't have to do necessarily with this, but they just are like stuck. Oh, I'm sure it's this. Oh, okay. So that's one option. What are 6 other possibilities? And really challenge yourself. And they can be silly and stupid. The other, to get up to 7, that's okay. It's almost like the practice of doing it makes you see that there are really other possibilities, even if some of them are like, well, I could move to Tahiti. Well, you're probably not really going to move to Tahiti, but just noticing that helps you break free of the thinking of being stuck.
It reminds me of the old brainstorming that I used to do. I was a high school social studies teacher in another lifetime 30 or so years ago. And it reminds me of how we used to do that when we were brainstorming for ideas. And you just let anything come up, even if it might be a little off or a little silly or maybe not even realistic. But in doing that, it frees your creativity to begin to think about possibilities that you're not thinking about. And I think that's part of the value.
That's right.
Of doing that.
And oftentimes, what I know from doing this with people hundreds of times is that you really do think of something the way that you haven't thought about before that actually is an option or a possibility, right?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So I love that part of your book about the Native Americans having 7 possible ways to respond to a situation. You also talk in the book about when we get into something and we're stuck, or when we're in something that feels hard for us, if we can look back and review other times when maybe we've met adversity and what we have done to help ourselves at those times, that can be useful as well. Can you comment on that?
Yes, and this is such a simple thing to do, but we often don't think of it, again, because we're focusing on the threat, because the emotional part of our brain is saying we're under threat, and it shuts down our thinking, focusing on anything but the danger. And that's just an adaptive response, which is good if it was a tiger chasing us. but not so good when it's these more emotional situations. Just focusing on the bad thing is not helpful, right?
That's right.
So how else do you expand? One thing is just to ask, how have I gotten through hard things before? And it doesn't matter how young you are. It's funny, I was doing a workshop on this. I was in a big auditorium with a group, I don't know, 200 women or something, and I was talking about resiliency and adversity and looking back at your previous pattern of success. This woman raised her hand and she said, well, I have a daughter in college and she hasn't had any hard things. So how do I help her? And I said, everyone is already, teenagers have all kinds of resilience already. I said, what about like if she didn't make the cheerleading squad or whatever? And she looked at me and she said, she didn't make the cheerleading squad. I said, and how did she deal with that? Help her understand what did she do, what was the process of overcoming this thing that was hard for her, and then she used that. So we all, no matter how old we are, have gone through hard things and have succeeded in getting through them. And looking back at that and saying, what actually did I do? How did I get through that, and how can I use that now?
I think another value in going through that process, which you just explained so beautifully, is sometimes we can see that something that happened that we thought was a real tragedy or difficult thing in our world, when we look back on it from 6 months, 10 years, whatever, however long we might have been alive and however long it takes, we can actually see value or have gratitude that thing actually did happen because something good came out of it that we had no idea was going to happen and we couldn't see at the time. I think that about your marriage ending.
Exactly. And so that realization is part of what led me to write this book, because I have met so many people who said things after the fact, like cancer was the best thing that happened to me, that breakup was the best thing that happened. It's like people talking about how going through this terrible thing that they thought was so awful at the time, and it was. It's not saying it wasn't, but that it led them to a place that they wouldn't be otherwise, and that is a better place, right? And so I wanted to understand that. But what you're talking about is a coping mechanism, is that even if you can't find meaning in the moment in this thing, like my sister's house burning down, what you can do is remember that you have found meaning and purpose and gotten to a better place from other hard things that have happened to you, right? So you can hope that this too will turn out that way.
That's right, even when you can't see it in the moment.
That's right.
Yeah. So you also have a section in your book that expresses something more clearly than I've ever seen it before. I'm not even sure that I've seen it quite in the words that you use. And that is about how in this process that we go through, we're really extending ourselves. We're extending into areas that we think are bigger than we are sometimes and that we don't really know how to move into. And you talk about when we're doing something new like that is either creatively risky or taking another step in growth, we also need to have planned in time to recoup our energies with a time of recovery. You mentioned that when you do exercise, you follow that up with time in a hot tub. And one of the things that I like to do when I am in a recovery mode from something that is either emotional or mental or physical exertion is to spend time in nature. Can you talk a little bit about those ideas you have about this expansion recovery time with our listeners? Because I really love it, and I think it's really important.
Sure. This comes from high-performance athletes, actually. And what they know is that exertion has to be followed by recovery, or else you never build up muscle because you're just tearing it down if you keep on exerting. And so people have taken this model and used it to help keep people, all, not just athletes, in terms of how do we be at our best. And so we need exertion, where you need to be pushing ourselves emotionally, mentally, physically, and obviously change. We didn't ask who forces us it's there, and we need to build in recovery time for those things. And so I do this practice with people where I ask them to figure out what are your recovery strategies. And for different people, it's very different. Some people, they run or they ride their bike, or for you, it's out in nature. And for me, it's sitting in my hot tub. It doesn't matter how many or what they are. You just need to know what they are, and you need to make sure you're doing them.
Yeah, I really appreciate that section of your book because I thought that was spot on and something that I hadn't really thought about in terms of emotional and mental and spiritual recovery. Well, once again, we're coming up on time for our break. When you or someone you know is going through a hard time, there are 3 kinds of support you can give. Tangible support, such as money, food, and shelter, advice and help with problem solving, and empathic listening. Think about what you need most at the moment and who might be able to offer it. After break, we'll be right back with MJ Ryan and Surviving Change You Didn't Ask For.
Your favorite Voice America Talk Radio Network shows and hosts are in your car, outdoors, and wherever you need them to be. Listen anywhere. Get our mobile app for iPhone, BlackBerry, or Android at the Apple iTunes App Store, BlackBerry App World, or Android Market.
Cathy Roberts offers Circle of Voices teleclasses to help you focus your mind, engage your energy, and awaken your inner guide. Through this experiential and interactive series, you will know yourself more and learn to express yourself authentically in your personal life. Visit Cathy's website at cathyroberts.net to find out about this teleclass series, designed to open you to change and engage healing in the fabric of your life. Go to cathyroberts.net or call Cathy at 301-651-0019 for more information. Cathy Roberts is not only an exceptional radio host, she's an exceptional listener and counselor. Cathy appeals to motivated, high-functioning people to help them improve their health and vitality. Cathy can meet you where you are and help you identify what you want. Visit Cathy's website at www.cathyroberts.net or call her at 301-651-0019. Cathy works with both individuals and couples and specializes in grief and depression counseling. Get to know yourself by working with Cathy. Visit cathyroberts.net or call 301-651-0019.
Your favorite Voice America Talk Radio Network shows and hosts are in your car, outdoors, and wherever you need them to be. Listen anywhere. Get our mobile app for iPhone, BlackBerry, or Android at the Apple iTunes App Store, BlackBerry App World, or Android Market.
You are listening to Voices for Healing with your host, Cathy Roberts. If you have a question or comment for the program, please send an email to Cathy at cathyroberts.net. That's Cathy at cathyroberts.net. Now back to Voices for Healing.
Welcome back, listeners, to Voices for Healing. MJ's book is an amazing resource for anyone going through change. The strategies, exercises, practices, vignettes, all offer support and inspiration for anyone traveling through change in these times we are in, and in my book, that's all of us. This book includes 20 quick tips for surviving change, as well as a list of books and resources to help with everything from career change to creativity, from emotions to neuroscience. You can visit her website at mj-ryan.com. And I want MJ to have a chance to tell you about other upcoming events she might have and other resources she might like you to know about. MJ, what would you like to share with us?
Oh, great. So for anyone who would like sort of more hands-on, in-depth work for themselves on surviving change, I'm going to be at Omega in Rhinebeck, New York on August 22nd through 24th doing a weekend workshop on how to survive change you didn't ask for. So you can go to omega.org. And you can find me, and I'd be delighted to have you and go on a journey with you.
That's excellent. That's actually, listeners, I'll just share with you, it was in the Omega catalog that I saw this workshop that MJ is doing, and I love the title of it because it resonates so much with what so many people I work with experience. And it's thanks to that catalog that MJ's on the show, and I'm really glad that you're here. So the third step that you talk about in your book about surviving change that we didn't ask for is taking action. We've accepted the change. We have done the work of expanding our options and building our team so that we know we're not alone in going through this. But sometimes taking those first steps and knowing what to do can feel intimidating. How do we begin? What do we do when we want to begin to take action?
So my favorite technique I learned from this organizational guru named David Allen. And what he says is, you don't have to know the whole thing of what you're going to do. In fact, you can't know, because until you take a first action, you're not going to know where that leads you, because as we know, life doesn't necessarily go in a straight line. So he says all you need to know is what's the first action. And I'll give you a very simple example of this, is that years ago when I was writing my first book, I realized I had to have a website. So on my to-do list, I wrote, create a website. And I had that, and I put it on my to-do list every single day for 6 months. So I was not getting into action. I was just, because I realized then I read this book of his, and I realized, oh, wait a minute, that's not an action. Creating a website is not an action. I don't even know what the action is. So I thought, all right, what's the first action here? And I thought, I could call my friend Dave. He did a website. So I called up Dave. Dave said, oh, yeah, you should use my guy. He's good and he's cheap. And so call him. So I called him. And he said, oh, yeah, happy to do it, $500, and just give me this, this, and this. So within an hour, I had completely solved my problem. But I couldn't have known the answer. I only knew what first step could I possibly take. So that getting really specific about saying, well, what's the very first thing I could do? You don't have to know the whole thing. I couldn't have known how to do a website. Mm-hmm. And you won't probably know how to do the thing it is that you're needing to take action on either. But if you break it down and just say, what's the first thing? And then after you do that, say, okay, what's the next thing? You one action your way into the future.
Yeah. And what about when we feel overwhelmed and unsure what action to take? How do we begin to navigate that?
Well, that's again where support comes in. Sometimes you might need some help. But another is to recognize you can't really make a mistake. This is part of what this phase of taking action is about, is treating ourselves and our lives like we were scientists. Like I always give the example of Thomas Edison. So we have the spirit of experimentation. Okay, I'll try this. So you want to get back out into the dating world, for instance, after this, X amount of time after the breakup. All right, you don't have to have the perfect solution. Try something. It doesn't really matter what you try. You can see if then it'll work. Thomas Edison, it took him 1,000 tries to find what made a light bulb light up. And when he was about at try 700, he was criticized by other scientists for failing. And he said, I have not failed. I haven't failed once. I haven't failed 700 times. I've succeeded in proving those ways do not work. So try something and see if it works. If it works, fabulous. If it doesn't work, that didn't work. So try something else.
Yes, I love that. And it reminds me of what I often talk with people about also, which is not needing a particular outcome with each and every try that we make, but to keep trying and have that experimental view and have a sort of, well, let's see what happens in this. Let's see what happens here. And then it gives us what Edison had, which was that ability to keep going rather than to think, oh, well, that didn't work. Now nothing will work. But
right.
To just, have that kind of open-ended attitude about it. Like, this is what I'm aiming for, and let's see what happens with it. And rather than, this is what I'm aiming for, and I have to have this happen.
Well, and so the other piece that Edison uses, and all scientists do, is what did I learn from that experiment? So it's not just having an open-minded idea, but asking yourself the question, what did I learn from that? Right?
Yes. What didn't work? Yeah. What do I know now that I didn't know then?
Because of what didn't work, right? Oh, yes. I don't really, a friend who went through a terrible breakup and, it took her about 3 years to start getting on the dating scene, and she went, a couple times to coffees from Match.com, and she realized what she learned was I'm not ready yet.
Yeah.
Right?
So and that's a good thing to know.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. I'm not ready yet, and I'm not ready to do it this way. I'm going to try other things. So, yeah.
There's something that feels really light and loose about we don't have to figure it out all in advance and know exactly what's going to happen, because how can we possibly do that? And there's something light about that. We can be a little more light on our feet as we're dancing down that road.
Well, yes, and when you talk about lightness, that also brings up one of the other keys to resilience we didn't really talk about, which is humor. Humor has also been found to be one of the key ways that we get through the hard things. And, because it floods our bodies with the feel-good hormones, so it makes us feel that little bit lighter. But so how can you experiment with humor? And in a humorous way. Oh, I tried that. Oh, you'll never forget. Oh, my goodness, you couldn't believe what happened. Blah, blah, blah. So you can laugh about it, or surround yourself with other things that are humorous for you, and then that also will help.
Yes. And for our listeners who want to know more about that, you can listen back on the May 5th show when Cindy Cecil Bragg was on, and she was talking about the healing power of humor and laughter being the best medicine. So that's there for listeners who want to know more about that key to resiliency. So thank you for bringing that up. I love the way things sort of circle around and all come together on the show.
Absolutely. Well, so there are some of these very basic positive emotions that as we go towards them, they really help us deal with whatever. So generosity, gratitude, humor, those are all things that really support us as we navigate. In fact, there's research that her name is Barbara Friedrichsen, and she asked, the negative emotions are there to protect us from harm. What are the positive emotions good for? Why do we human beings have them? And what she's discovered is they're there to help us recover from the negative ones. They bring us back into balance. They bring us back to equilibrium and help us enjoy life. So adding any of those in, practicing hopefulness, practicing optimism, practicing gratitude, generosity, those help us counterbalance the challenges that we're going through.
That's terrific. And you segued right into my next question, which is you have a section in your book about the role of hope in making action steps. And I wonder if you can share with us a little bit more about what you know about hope.
Well, there's a couple things. One is that hope is not a plan, right? There's this famous quote that says that, well, I hope it'll be okay. Well, that's not planning, right? So we need to be as concrete as we possibly can, so that we don't just hope it'll change, but we actually take action, right? What's the specific concrete thing we're going to do? But at a more general level, hope helps us get into action. It promises a better future. It says, I don't know how this is going to happen. I don't know when. I don't know where, but I'm going to hold out the possibility that this is going to get better for me. And taking that as a stance, it's like learned optimism. It's very similar to hope, which is, this is temporary, not permanent. I can get through this. All of those positive actions. I believe my life will get better. Trust in a positive outcome is one of the other keys to resilience. One of the 5 that we haven't mentioned. We've now hit pretty on all of them, I think. So trust in the positive outcome is a hopeful action, right?
Yes.
And so it's the fake it until you make it. You can act as if you have hope. You can consciously work on it. Say, I don't know how or when or where, but I am going to put my trust in the fact that things will get better.
Yeah.
I'm going to hope.
Yeah. Are there particular attitudes you think that we can hold in terms of strengthening our ability to adapt so that we become adapters and become people who, if not at least welcoming change, we move towards it and say, yeah, I've mastered this in the past. I can do it again. Are there?
Absolutely. And one is really the recognition that everything will change. You don't know when or where, but everything will change. And that, at least accepting it in the abstract, when it actually starts to happen, you're going, oh, this is one of those things,
yeah.
that I wanted to stay the same, but it's not staying the same. And that's one. And the other is that it's not personal. It's not happening because you're bad, you did something wrong, you're insufficient or inadequate. It's that this is part of the human condition, right? And so that recognizing that we're in this together makes us more resilient because we don't shame ourselves and guilt trip ourselves into paralysis. So the attitude of it's not personal, and it's gonna happen. I think the last one, I can get through it. I've gotten through other things. I can get through this. I can get through this, even though I don't want to.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember so many times when I was young going through hard things with terrible back pain and in bed for a year, and it was like I just remember thinking I did everything wrong. That's why I had to write this book. I said it'll never change. It's all my fault. I mean, and I always said I can't get through this. I won't be able to cope with this. But here I am. Now I'm 61 and I've coped with it all, right? So we have much more resilience than we often feel in the times when we feel despair.
Yes.
But
yes. I appreciate
the attitude that we can do it.
I appreciate your sharing with us the impetus, the motivation, that what was behind writing this book for you was feeling like you weren't going to be able to survive that change. And I think that is often what really motivates us to do something. We're almost at the end of our time, so I want to highlight those 3 points that you just made for people. So if you're going through change, or even if you don't feel like you're going through big change right now, the things to keep in mind when change does begin to happen is to expect it, to know that change is going to happen, to know that it's not personal, and to know that you've gotten through hard things before and you will get through them again. Our hour has passed so quickly. MJ, I'm so glad that you were with us here for this hour. I thank you for being here.
I'm my pleasure, and thank you so much, Cathy.
I hope our listeners enjoyed gaining skills and adaptability. MJ Ryan is a true change master. I hope you'll join us next week. My guest will be Mark Matusik, author of many books, including When You Are Falling, Dive. He will be sharing with us his lessons in the art of living. Be well during the week. We will be back next week. Until then, this is Cathy Roberts saying transform yourself, embrace vitality.
Thank you for listening to Voices for Healing. Please join Cathy Roberts again next Monday morning at 8 a.m. Pacific Time, 11 a.m. Eastern Time on the Voice America Health and Wellness Channel. We wish you the best recovery from your loss, and we'll talk again next week.